How does one start a university? Well, I think this university started out of necessity and the realization that there must be a better way of providing education. I'm a product of traditional educational system. I have a bachelor's degree in engineering, and I went out and I became an engineer, worked in engineering for 6 years. And then conversations with family, they said, Don, why don't you go into teaching? And to go into teaching, I found I needed an advanced degree. I needed a master's degree. And so I was working, had family, had obligations, as anyone has when they're in their 30s. And so I attended school at night. Took me 5 years at night between commuting, taking care of family, and all the other responsibilities to get a master's degree. And then I went on to teach for 10 years at a community college in New York, starting in New York. I'm bi-coastal, by the way, from New York to California and in between. While I was teaching at the community college with the master's degree, I found that I needed a further degree in order to get an advancement. I was stuck at being an assistant professor. And of course, I wanted to rise up through the ranks and become an associate professor, full professor. And with that, there became more responsibility and certainly more income. Well, I said, okay, I'm going to go back and get my doctorate. But this time I lived about 45 miles from the university where I finally received my doctorate in engineering science. And that took 10 years between commuting back and forth and taking care of family. By now the family continued to grow responsibilities. And going back and forth and actually having to drive to park to get dinner and then falling asleep during class, it occurred to me that this was not the most efficient, after all, I am an engineer, this was not the most efficient way of acquiring an education. And it seems to me that this is back into the old mechanical age where industry first started with mass production, where you bring the worker to a workplace. So schools, traditional schools, classroom schools, said as classroom-based schooling, requires that you bring the student to a central location, and they all come there and to listen to the wisdom from the professor, the talking guru. And I felt there had to be a better way from my experience. Altogether, it took me 15 years of graduate school to finally get my degree. Well, the opportunity came when I was in California, when I was a dean here in the West Coast, and also teaching at night, again to get extra income. And it occurred to me that perhaps if we were to bring the education to the learner, we call them learners, not students, then we could be more efficient. Instead of having people travel, we can do this by, at that time, correspondence. And we're looking back at 1978, and the only method of communication was what we call snail mail. There were telephones, but there was no direct dial for long distance. There were no fax machines. There were no computers. And so it was quite primitive. However, that's the way we were able to communicate by mail, back and forth. So I started the university at that time, and I figured that I could do no worse than the traditional. Perhaps I could do better. And what it evolved from necessity, from practicality, that when I was having a learner taking a course, after all I taught, I was the admissions department. I graded any complaints, I handled them, so I did everything. And the important thing was that I realized that what happened was a new model here, because I was talking and dealing with the individual student directly. It wasn't a classroom setting. It wasn't one professor talking to a group of 30 or 50 or 100. I was actually in communication with this individual who was my learner, and it harkens back to the notion of the tutor, the mentor, the individual that came to you and you exchanged ideas and learned. And that was the genesis, really, of how this school just emerged and how it grew. And certainly by the mid-'80s, the computer was upon the scene. Direct dial, the internet was coming aboard, the floppy disk had been invented, and there was now much more communication. Wasn't at the level it is now, where you have instant communication with anyone around the world, but the model of having one-on-one persisted. And that's the hallmark of this university, is the one-on-one interaction with the learner. So it is possible. You know, schools advertise and market themselves as saying, we have small class sizes, because they recognize the importance of the interaction between two individuals is the hallmark of good learning. So that's something that has been the foundation of this university, is to maintain that personal, one-on-one, humanistic touch. In that way, the mentor and the learner, they're sitting at opposite ends of a log, let's say, and they're having this conversation about what's important to each. From the faculty, the mentor's standpoint, he's the expert in the particular field. The learner comes with an interest to understand what's going on, to be guided in their learning process. So therefore, you have an opportunity when you work one-on-one with someone to find out what their needs are, what their wants are, what their experiences are, what do they bring to the learning process, what's important to them, how do they learn. And in that way, the learner is interested in what's going on. It's not a tell, you listen situation as it exists in the classroom, where a professor has to deal with 20 or 30 or 50 people. He can't possibly know what each individual's needs are, nor can he meet those needs. He's only interested in delivering the information that's available at that particular time. Whether the learner gets it, whether the student gets it, understands it, integrates it into their experiences and uses it, that's not part of the educational process in the traditional environment. However, as soon as you get down to one-on-one, the ultimate, not a 20-to-1, not a 15-to-1, not a 10-to-1, but a 1-to-1, you're at the ultimate interaction between a mentor and a learner. And that's what's the hallmark of this university. We want the individual to bring their experiences, their wants, their needs to the learning experience. So that even if a course in accounting, something that is structured, it's a very structured type course, you start off and you end, and at the end you know how to do accounting to an extent. How does that relate to your needs? That would be my first question to the learner. Why are you taking this? How do these experiences help you as a better person, perhaps, or a better business person? And these are the types of questions that we ask our faculty to present to the learner, so that there can be a basis for further learning. And that basically is, well, basically, that's a whole revolution in itself. Today, with the internet and communication, it's very easy to reach anybody in the world, 7 billion people. Most of them speak English, or wish they spoke English, American English. So therefore it becomes our job to relate to their needs, the needs of somebody in Vietnam, to understand business or psychology or law is different from the needs of somebody in, say, one of the states here in America. They have a different perspective. Therefore, when we talk to them one-on-one, we're able to see where they're coming from, where are they, what are their needs.